Hello, welcome to the channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Matt and this is Bask in the Story, and today we're going to do the August wrap-up of everything I read. So we've got some physical books, I think 4 physical books, and 3 that I'd either have returned to the library or audiobooks. But of the books I've read, there were 2 5 stars, both quite different, no, not quite different, both very different. So how I'm going to choose my book of the month at the end, I'm not quite sure. So what I'm going to do is work through the stories now and then make a decision at the end of which one will win my book of the month. So let's start with fantasy, because I read quite a lot of genres here. We've got fantasy, we've got literary thriller, I suppose we classed as, we've got a classic, we've got a couple of non-fiction, and we've got a sci-fi. So quite a broad range of genres to cover, but we're going to start with fantasy because there's 2 fantasy reads for August, and one of them was, let's start on our big high, was the 5-star, and that was Valour, book 2 in the Faithful and the Fallen series by Gwynne. I thoroughly enjoyed the first book, which was Malice. That was brilliant. This is epic multi-POV fantasy. We've got, I don't know how many points of view we actually cover, but it's a huge number. I may actually have to count them up at some point to see how many points of view there actually are. But there are so many great characters in this. You're engaged with a huge number of characters and actually engaged with them. The chapters are short, but it's fast paced. There's always something happening. There's always some twist, some turn, some action. And it's just superb. I mean, I've rapidly read through this. We're doing this as part of a read along it's been led by Theo from Rekindled Reader, RJ Reads, and the brothers Gwynne. So in this book, I enjoyed the first one, but this one stepped it up. This was better than the first one. This was really developed some of the characters. We learned new information about some of the characters. We had a lot more action. There was a lot more political intrigue and wars that caused political upset within the Banished Lands where this takes place. But also there was, and it caught me out at the end, there was an emotional element to the end that did bring a tear to my eye. I'm not too proud to admit. There was certainly some wet eyes, and I was almost crying my eyes out at the end of this. So it was absolutely superb. The third book, which I'll be reading in September, is called Ruin. So if you saw my TBR, you'd have known that already. But Ruin, which after the emotional impact of the end of this one, a book called Ruin does not bode well for how much of a wreck I might be at the end of it. But this is superb. If you enjoy epic fantasy, if you enjoy multiple points of view, then this series is well worth your time to read. So that was Valour by Gwynne. So that's one of the 2 5 stars. The other fantasy book I read this month was my continuation of the Discworld. So we had Weird Sisters by Terry Pratchett. This is the second in the Witches sub-series, hence Weird Sisters. And it's the first one in that Witches sub-series where you get the main coven of witches. So you've got Granny Weatherwax, who appears in the first Witches book, but you've also got Nanny Og and Margaret, who arrives as well. And they make up this 3-witch coven. And what I love about this is there's a lot of Shakespeare within it. So Hamlet, Macbeth run through this storyline. We've got ghosts. We've obviously got witches. We've got a king who's murdered very early on in the story, so it's not a spoiler. And also, if you know anything about some of the Shakespeare plays, then that's not a spoiler at all. But it's entertaining, it's amusing as always. I like it. You feel a bit smart when you read it if you get the Shakespeare references. And I'm not a huge Shakespeare fan, but I know some of the plays and I've certainly seen them performed as well, which helps to get some of the references. There are references to other material as well within here. It's not just Shakespearean references. There's plenty of other references to folklore and literature within it, and films as well. But what you've got is effectively the king's been murdered, someone's taken his place, and it's the son of the king has escaped with help from the witches, and it's sort of that arc of trying to bring him back to take his rightful place as king. But what Pratchett also does, and what he also does so well with this one is more than that. So what we're also discovering is the power of words. So to influence people, but also to change history and our view of history and our view of different groups of individuals and the stereotypes we get and where they come from and why we have them. As always, there's more to it than it looks, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's very, very good. It's a brilliant addition to the Discworld series and to the Witches. And I know they said this is the second in the Witches sub-series. For me, this is probably the first real Witches story. I always think the first one, which name escapes me at the moment, which is Equal Rights. Equal Rights is always a Witches, Wizards collaboration, anti-collaboration almost. And this is the first sort of pure Witches story. And as you get the three main witches who you will follow through the next few books in this sub-series, it feels a solidly Witches one. And the characters of the witches are a bit more formed as to who they are and what they be and what role they play within the coven. Anyway, excellent, fun, always enjoyable, and always a message to take away with you. So that was a two fantasy. Let's go to one I haven't got. Let's move on to literary thriller. And that would be Birnam Wood by Eleanor Catton. I have done a book review for this, which I will link in the little bit at the top. I don't know what, the card at the top. So this is Eleanor Catton's third novel. Pretty sure it's her third. You may be aware she won the Booker Prize for The Luminaries. What was that, 10 years ago? A while ago. This is very different. It's a first foray into the thriller genre. And what this is about a guerrilla gardening group called Birnam Wood. They basically take over plots of land that are unused or, in their view, underused, and plant up crops and then reap the crops to sell or feed themselves, etc., etc. A lot of the activity they do is potentially illegal or is illegal, and they come across an area of land that's they view as very suitable for what they want to do, but there's also a billionaire who's trying to buy up the land to put a bunker on there, or so we think. There's a lot more detail in my review on this. Unfortunately, this was a decent book. It was a, it kept me reasonably engaged throughout, but you get the first part of the book is very much about the relationships within the Birnam Wood group and the introduction to the billionaire, who is a bit cartoon villain character. And then the second half of the book, you really get into the more thriller element and the pace really quickens up and there's quite a climatic ending. But all I think I'll really remember from this book in a few years' time is probably the climatic ending, and also a bit where there's a small discussion between two of the main characters around something from the Harry Potter books about Dumbledore being wrong, which will stick with me. I don't know why that will stick with me, maybe because I'm reading Harry Potter for the first time as well recently. Anyway, so there's probably the bits. The rest of the story probably not going to stick with me, unfortunately. But it's a decent read. It's, relatively engaging. It touches on things like ownership, who owns the land, who owns therefore our futures. There's a lot of what would be more related to New Zealand politics around. I know there was an issue or political issue in New Zealand about billionaires coming in and buying up land in New Zealand to put their bunkers for ecological survival when they've earned their money by not necessarily looking after the land in the first place. So there's certain politics expressed within that. So this was good, not great, not the most memorable book. If you want to know why Dumbledore was wrong, you can check out my full review. It is timestamped in the full review, so you don't have to watch the whole thing if you don't want to. But that was Birnam Wood. So that was literally a thriller. Let's move on to sci-fi. So sci-fi, I had the last, again, I haven't got a physical copy, but that was the Toll, which is the third in the Arc of the Scythe series by Neal Shusterman. This has been a fun series to read. I really like the premise that Neal Shusterman's created here, and what we've got. I'm not going to say too much about this book because it's the final one in the trilogy, but I have done a full series review, which was sort of non-spoiler series review, which you can watch on the link. I'll put it up on the cards again. But this is our world set a little bit in the future. It doesn't tell us how far in the future, so we're not really clear how much further in the future, but effectively what we've got is we've got an AI has a beneficial AI, I should say, has taken over the world, and we've got humanity maybe at the peak of its existence. We've overcome death. There's no death from, misfortune or accident or old age or disease. It's all been solved. We can live effectively forever, but certainly for hundreds of thousands of years. That caused an issue with supply and demand because there's only so many resources on Earth. So we also have a separate organization from the AI, which is called the Scythe. So we've got the Scythes, and the Scythes are an independent group, so independent from the AI, and the AI has rules built in where it can't touch anything or be involved in anything that's called a scythe action or within the Scythehood. And these individuals within this organization basically kill people. They go around killing people in society to keep the numbers down. They have a certain quota for each scythe, and the manner in which they kill them is basically their choice. But as the story progresses, we see the divides and divisions within the Scythehood and the impact that has on society and the impact it has on the scythes themselves and the Scythehood in general. We have what are portrayed as the villainous scythes, and they are... one of my criticisms of it is quite black and white, especially the first book is very black and white about who's good and who's bad, and the bad are just bad to the core. It gets a little grey as it goes along, which I enjoyed, and this wraps it up quite well. I think always wrapping up any sort of dystopian sci-fi trilogy or any real trilogy or more books in a neat bow is always challenging. I like the way Neal Shusterman picked out parts that you were aware of from the first book, but didn't necessarily question, that came together and had a point in the final book. So that was quite nicely done. And it was relatively satisfying end to the series, and it's one that you'll get through fairly quickly if this is your kind of genre, this dystopian utopian scenario. But I just really enjoy the concept and the premise that Neal Shusterman has created, and this benevolent AI ruling the world for the way it uses the benefit of mankind and actually trying to benefit mankind rather than a normal dystopian vision of an AI out of control that is trying to destroy humanity in whatever various means it tries. So this was actually quite a pleasing conclusion to the series. So that was the fantasy, sci-fi and literary thriller. Let's do the classic next. Should we do a classic next? Let's do a classic next. So thank you to everyone who voted on the poll that we had on the community tab of what Jane Austen I should read next in my classic journey. I had two options. I had Pride and Prejudice and Northanger Abbey, and Pride and Prejudice just won. It was very touch and go for quite a while, but Pride and Prejudice just won. And my God, am I delighted that this won. This was superb. And I know I probably sound like I've been stuck under a rock for most of my life, having never read Jane Austen. But what I didn't realise is how witty and funny and humorous Jane Austen actually is. The writing is brilliant. Even from the first chapter, you're engaged and you're smiling and you're amused by the text. And the writing for a classic is really easy. It is, I've gone from, previous to this I read Silas Marner, and that was George Eliot, and that was a little denser. I found it a little bit more challenging to read some of the dialogue because she gave them portraying the sort of the country accent in her dialogue, made it a bit more challenging for me to get to grips with. This was super easy to read. There was no real barrier to me understanding it and enjoying it. And the storyline is fantastic. And I don't read much romance, but if romance is like this story where it evolves and develops and you have the wit and the humour and the social commentary that's built into this, if most romances are like this, then I may become a romance reader. This was superb. It is just a fabulous story of love, the building of love, but it's also a commentary on people and society. And originally I think she was going to call this First Impressions, but obviously changed to Pride and Prejudice. But it is about how people view others. It's how we from first impressions having such an impact on how we view someone, and almost the challenge of overcoming those opinions at certain points, and the expectations of people, even people we haven't met, the stereotyping of people and communities and groups that we have even today. And obviously this is social commentary on the period when Jane Austen wrote this, but there's still plenty that holds true today, and that's what's brilliant. And she tells it with such a wit that you're just smiling as you read it. It was superb. So this was the other 5-star that I've got to now decide whether this gets Book of the Month or whether Valour gets Book of the Month. But before I do that, we're going to do the 2 non-fiction that I read in August. So the first one, I haven't got a physical copy, is The Enlightenment, The Pursuit of Happiness by Ritchie Robertson. So I read both of these non-fiction books actually as part of the Historathon 2023. This one is a beast. It's 1,000 pages or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of references at the end, so it's not really 1,000 pages, but this is a beast, and it covers sort of 100 years of the Enlightenment, from 1690 to 1790, something like that. What I enjoyed about this is Ritchie Robertson uses a lot of the primary sources for the text. So he is taking a lot of quotations from primary sources, so from the Enlightenment thinkers of the period, and the book is broken up into different sections. Then we follow that, or different topics, I should say, and then we follow the history of that topic over this period, and how views were thought about, how they were changed, the discussions that were held, the altering viewpoints, etc., etc. And he doesn't shy away from showing what we would view today as, or what we'd criticise today, some of the viewpoints that were held during the Enlightenment by these Enlightenment thinkers, who in some texts you'll read about Enlightenment thinkers and you get this glowing view of this period of time where we suddenly realised what Enlightenment was. As actually it was a process. It was already happening before this period. This was just, with an arbitrary period that we set where the views that were starting coming in became more formalised and discussed and built upon, and we moved into, into the 19th century, I suppose, 1800s. It does cover the views we would criticise now, as well as the views that we'd probably agree with now, and we can see where the progress is made and the discussions and the arguments that were had, and that was all fascinating. Unfortunately, the reason it didn't work for me is that it just felt quite dry, and I didn't feel massively engaged in what I was reading, and maybe that says more about me as the period that I was reading in it and where my mindset was at the time, but I'm not sure that I'm going to take away a huge amount that I'm going to remember from reading this text, which is unfortunate because it's a beast of a text, and I just don't think it's going to stick with me that long of what was actually said. And as I say, that might say more about me than it does about the text itself, but that's the unfortunate thing on that one. It's just didn't engage me enough to be memorable, which is unfortunate. The other one I read did engage me enough to be memorable, and that was Longitude by Dava Sobel. So this is about effectively a lone genius, I think she describes them as, a lone genius, Harrison, who solved the problem of longitude. And it was, first of all, it was amazing to think that longitude hadn't really been solved until the 1700s, and that we were sailing around the world without really knowing exactly where we were once we were out of sight of land, and not being able to accurately measure longitude, and the number of shipwrecks and delays and ships lost at sea that we had due to that issue. It is surprising that we'd sailed for thousands of years without being able to do it accurately. And I did a review on this. You can go and check that out in the cards above. But this is a short book. It's only 150 pages, something like that. It's not long, but it covers off the period of time of this Harrison. So we cover off the importance of why we needed a solution to longitude. We then cover off basically Harrison's inventions and how he solved this problem, and how he developed the technology we had to such an extent that it just took it to a completely new level, And the technology I'm talking about is clocks. It's clocks. That's what the solution was. But it was then the debate around how you get a clock. For that period, clocks would lose minutes and minutes and minutes a day. But he was able to make clocks that hardly lost any time whatsoever. And that was remarkable, and the things he did to achieve that, and effectively by himself. And he created various versions of it. There was a prize set up by the British government because they wanted this problem solved, because obviously they were expanding, at the time starting to expand their empire, and shipping and the control of the seas was vitally important, and solving Longitude was huge value to the British government at that time. He solved it, but then we get the challenge, because Howson came up with this mechanical solution, this engineering solution, but there's also this potential astronomical solution of the moon, the stars, etc., which effectively we use for latitude, that they wanted to try and use for longitude. And because the way the prize was set up, a lot of the people sat on the board deciding who won the prize for longitude, which was a lot of money in those days, were astronomers, and they favoured obviously the astronomical route. And Howson really had to fight and continue to progress, and it took decades for him to win the award and have his solution actually accepted, because it was just an engineering solution. You know, and she talks in here about the genius of the country bumpkin, which I'm always partial to, being a country bumpkin myself, but probably not a genius. In fact, definitely not a genius, but country bumpkin nonetheless is one of my kin that I would like to cheer on. So if you haven't read Longitude and you're interested in sea travel, you're interested in engineering, technology, development of those ideas, this is a really good book to read. It's easy to read, it's quick to pick up, it's quick to get through, so it's only about 150 pages. Dava Sobel's writing is engaging, the story itself is engaging, you get to understand some of the characters involved. It's very, very good. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. So they were all the books I read in August. So now I've got to decide for my book of the month. So it's either going to be 2 5-stars, so Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, or Valour by John Gwynne. Quite different books. So I think I'm going to choose, because it surprised me more, I think I'm going to choose Pride and Prejudice as the book of the month, because I expected to enjoy this, and I did. I enjoyed it probably more than I expected, but I really expected to enjoy this. This one, I wasn't sure how much I would enjoy, and I loved it. Absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it, and I will be checking out more of Jane Austen's work. I've been suggested Persuasion or Northanger Abbey, which I've got Northanger Abbey. I don't think I have Persuasion to read next. I probably won't get to it this year, but say next year, I'll have to pick one of those, at least one of those up. This was brilliant. It blew me out of the water. I was absolutely stunned at how good, how witty, and how much wisdom there was in there. And yeah, I was just blown away by this. So this is going to be my book of the month, which surprises me greatly. But Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen is the best book I read in August. That is my August reading. How did your August reading go? Let me know in the comments. What was your book of the month? What was your favourite book from August? If you enjoyed this video, please do like, comment, subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And I'll look forward to speaking to you in the next one. Bye. It does, as I say, it does cover the critical views, what would criticise the views